Thank you all for coming. My name is Jesse Iliff. I'm Executive Director of the Severn River Association, and welcome to October's John Wright Speaker Series event. We're really excited about tonight's speaker, but before we get to introducing him, I'd like to go over a couple of brief housekeeping items. If you haven't checked your phones yet, please silence your phones. And we also have some surveys back at the back of the room. So I encourage you after the event is over to take a minute, click the QR codes with your phones and let us know what you thought of tonight's speaker series event. This is the first time that we've done this event here at the Eastport Library. So we'd especially like to hear from you about the venue. I know that a few of you live close by, but we're trying to move this speaker series around the watershed a little bit more to make it easy for people to attend from all different parts of the Seven Rivers watershed. We will have some time at the end of tonight's talk for Q&A. So if you have a question, please make a mental note of it and save it until the end. A couple of quick updates about Severn River Association's work before I'll hand it over to our board member and adult education chair. I'm proud to announce that earlier this month, we learned that we won a grant for a stormwater project in the East Pendennis Mount community. We just finished earlier this week a fall planting over across Forest Drive at the Georgetown East community, where we are pioneering a new approach of using fungal mycelium within the filter mix of that stormwater practice to try and better absorb nutrients from stormwater. Earlier this month, we had our first foray towards the Lifeline 100 bicycling event, which benefited Severn, and it was a success. It was a lot of fun. I hope that if any of you are or know cyclists, that you'll encourage them to sign up to benefit SRA for next year's event. And the last thing I'll say is that we are currently in the midst of grant writing season. We're preparing 9 proposals for a grant program that is due on November 7th to do more stormwater management practices throughout the Severn River watershed. Thanks to the support of our members, we're able to do a lot of this kind of grant writing work. And thank you all for coming. And I will hand it off now to Brian Gomes, our board member and adult education chair, to introduce our speaker. Brian?
Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, folks. Thanks for being here tonight. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I want to let you know that our next John Wright Speaker Series will be next month on Monday, November 24th, right back in this very room. And the speaker is Dave Gendell, and he is speaking on his recent book that is called The Last Days of the American Schooner. And he's the last days of the American schooner.
No, the Schooner America.
The last days of the Schooner America.
It named America. It's not like a style of schooner.
Thank you.
It's a good book.
And he will be here live is the important part I was trying to say. Okay. You want to go now, Anderson?
Yeah, so sorry, one thing that I forgot to mention. Tonight's speaking event is sponsored by our friends at Waterfront Preservation, a marine contracting company that does work all throughout Anne Arundel County. So thanks to them. Okay. Now, without further ado,
The Von Trapp family.
So Baltimore native and longtime sailor Bob lives with his wife Melinda at Turkey Point Island, which I believe is down in Edgewater. And treasure looking across at Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse. Bob has been leading tours aboard the lighthouse since the tours began in 2007. Bob has served on the board of directors for the Chesapeake chapter of the United States Lighthouse Society, as well as education coordinator and public speaker presenting lighthouse talks to groups of all ages. Fun fact, though not related as far as he knows, he shares his name with one of the most significant lighthouse engineers in history, Scotland's Robert Stevenson, who is the grandfather of Robert Louis Stevenson, and first of a dynasty that became known as the Lighthouse Stevensons. And also, quick poll, raise your hand if 5 years ago you were on SRA's Zoom call with Bob when we did this during the pandemic. Did anyone hear his talk 5 or so years ago? Okay, All right, fresh faces. Without further ado, this is Bob Stevenson.
They sent me to the Annapolis Library. Sorry about that. Is this working okay?
Yeah.
All right, great, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to play advanced two computers at once and see what happens here. Where is the little, there, okay. Basically, I want to give you a kind of a historical picture. You might recognize the Chesapeake Bay. And in this diagram, there are a lot of little yellow spots up and down the bay and on the tributaries, indicating there were somewhere close to, from starting at 1790 up until today, the peak was around 9,900 or so. Not 9,900, 99 or 100 or so lighthouses and lightships on the bay. And that is way too many for us to talk about tonight. So we're going to move this thing along, and we're going to go to the first lighthouse built on the bay. Oh dear, there are two lighthouses there, aren't there? We are at Cape Henry. You know where Cape Henry is? Yeah, basically Virginia Beach. And the shorter lighthouse on the right on this picture is the old Cape Henry Lighthouse. It was built from a beginning that the colony of Virginia had started. They had assembled most of the materials at this point and were prepared to erect a lighthouse. And then there was a Revolutionary War. It slowed things down. Ninth Act of Congress in 1789, if my memory is good. Oh, no, I'm not remembering that. I'm not that old. The Ninth Act of Congress established building and managing lighthouses and other navigational aids throughout the country. So it was a very important thing for the new nation to be able to guide ships up and down the way. So there we go. The one on the left is the new Cape Henry Lighthouse. And they're both still there, and together they are a National Historic Landmark. You can see the new one is a little taller and black and white, a little easier to see in the daytime. The problem was, you can see the older one is on kind of sandy looking ground. And it looked like maybe there was going to be some structural problems because of that. So they built the new one and left the old one there. So when you go to visit these, you have to go into the entrance from the south of Fort Story. It's on a military fort base. And when we were able to go, this is long before the pandemic, you surrendered your ID at the gate, you got on one of their buses to go up to where the lighthouses are, and you could explore the lighthouses. So these two lighthouses have been guiding ships into the mouth of the bay ever since. Now, this is New Point Comfort. It's in Mobjack Bay, which is a bit north of Cape Henry. It's the third oldest surviving lighthouse in the bay. And so it too has been here a long time, but it has suffered in time. That's the same lighthouse. This is the Chesapeake, and as if you didn't already know, erosion happens. So fortunately, Matthews County now has taken ownership of the lighthouse and has been able to preserve this tiny little bit of land that the lighthouse is standing on. And you can see from the landing pier, they are continuing to work to maintain this lighthouse. And if we're all lucky, we might be able to visit one time, but not that I know of right now. Now, there's a new hero on the bay. The Lighthouse Centers is an organization whose mission is to restore the lighthouse, restore the bay. And this Oops, wrong button. There we go. This is Rich Couchet, who started the Lighthouse Centers. He actually lives in Pennsylvania, and he has a sandblasting company where for many, many years, he's used blasting techniques to clean and preserve pretty much anything that can be blasted using all sorts of different blasting materials. But on YouTube, on October 12th, 2024, he made an announcement. We are quitting our jobs for a lighthouse. The we includes Rich and his son, and they're hoping to become full-time YouTubers, although they haven't hit that yet. They have 3 lighthouses now. Hooper Island, Craig Hill Channel Lower Range, and Wolf Trap. Hooper, or Hupper, as they say on the Eastern Shore, and Craig Hill Channel, of course, are in Maryland. Wolf Trap is in Virginia. And they're all in somewhat rough condition. So this is Hooper Island as it appeared in 1969, which was the last year before the Coast Guard automated it. And then, of course, nobody was living aboard. And as you'll see in the next photo, even the living quarters around the lower deck where the boat is hanging have changed. That's the front door. You think anything nasty has happened over the years? Right. So, in fact, between the time the Coast Guard or the federal government actually put it up for sale and the time that Rich bought it, the Lighthouse Society purchased it. And they were going to do what they could to preserve it. Unfortunately, it is so far south on the eastern shore that the society couldn't arrange enough visitors, members, especially somebody with a boat that could take us out there and do the work. And so they had to cede it back, and then the government put it up for sale again, and Rich bought it. And in 2023, that front door was broken open, which is unfortunate. This is the original Wolf Trap lighthouse. This is an 1893 picture. It's in the Matthews, Virginia area, south of the Rappahannock River. And I included this, even though it's not there anymore, just so you could see an example of a screw pile lighthouse with some unusual features, including the bell tower, which is on the right, separate structure from the main house. And you'll notice these screw piles sticking out on the left and on the right all the way up. And this was a common feature on these screw pile lighthouses in the bay, designed to protect them against ice flows in the wintertime. Designed to protect them against ice flows in the wintertime. I have news. This is Wolf Trap today. What happened to the screw pile? Ice happened, knocked it down. A common thing that happened to these screw pile lighthouses. You'll notice here this big heavy caisson and the brick structure on top. That costs a lot more than a screw pile lighthouse to create and to assemble and to put up. And so they built screw pile lighthouses because they were cheap. As you'll see, that was a short-lived thing. Here we go. This is the same lighthouse, Wolf Trap, in 2021. And you can see there's some issues there. So I would like to zoom in on that deck. And you can see windows are open and broken and the deck has got a void in it. And well, the outhouse is still there on the left. So at least that's still there. So Oops, I always hit the wrong button. No. Yep, yep, nope, yep. Um, this is Smith Point, and you're not supposed to see that yet. So just pretend it's a blank slide. The first tower was built there in 1802. You know where Smith Point is? It's in Virginia, but not by much because it's right at the mouth of the Potomac River. It's a couple of miles offshore. The first tower was built on land. Erosion happened. Second tower built. Lightship replaced the tower. New tower, I mean, it's just an old story that keeps going on. So this is Smith Point today. And I'm going to show you some pictures from a real estate listing from when it was put up for sale recently for the second time. The owner actually is in, I believe they said he lives in Wisconsin. I don't know. Why did he do that? But it's on the market. I've talked to the realtor just a couple of weeks ago. She is most anxious for any of you who might be interested in a lovely weekend waterfront home. And as you can see, there's some pretty nice looking rooms in there. They've done a really good job of restoring it. And for, I forget now if she said it was 15 years or quite a few years, they would come down from the Midwest and come out in a boat and spend weekends or even longer on the lighthouse. That's very nice. I didn't load up all 50 or 60 pictures from the real estate listing. But if you go online to the realtors and look for address, I believe, is 00 Smith Point Road. She had to invent an address so the multi-list people, you know, they need an address for a multi-list. So there you go. So now we're going to take a look up north a bit, Craig Hill Channel Range. Yes. I think it may be about 400,000, maybe plus or minus. Don't depend on that number. If you really want to know, call her and tell her Bob sent you. She, like most realtors I've ever met, she's very cordial, very helpful, and very anxious to please whoever she's talking to in hopes that they'll become a customer. So here's Craig Hill Channel, and it's a lower range front light. Now we'll talk about ranges here in a second, but you can see this is another one of these sturdy caisson lighthouses, and it's got a couple of pairs of davits for the boats to get in and out. And I'll bring you to a little bit better picture. You can see the tower behind. That's the rear range light. Now, those of you who are boaters may know what a range light system is all about. Yeah, you got it. If you see a light here and a light there, you're not in the channel. If you see them like this, you are in the channel. There's a boat that for quite a while, not a boat, a ship, we not so affectionately referred to as the Never Forward. Remember when the Ever Forward went aground? Well, they were coming down the channel, so they weren't looking towards the range light, but ask the pilot what happened. Now, on this particular light, let me just step over here for a second, because I have to point. This is actually the range light that goes with that range light. There is also, or was at least, a beacon up here for local navigation. So you didn't have to be on the range to be able to use that for navigation purposes, only if you wanted to stay in the channel to Baltimore. Which reminds me, why so many lighthouses in the bay? Well, the goal was to guide shipping safely to Baltimore. They weren't interested in coming here to Annapolis. Baltimore was the big port. Who knows why Baltimore was such an important port and still remains an important port today? Transportation West, you get 2 points. Maybe even 3. Yes, the Port of Baltimore is the farthest west port on the East Coast to the markets in the middle of the Midwest country. Excuse me while I turn off. That's telling me it's time for my diabetes shot. However, I've already had it. So Rich Couchet owns these 3 lighthouses we've just seen. And as you can tell, they span a lot of the bay. And he is working hard to raise money and preserve these lighthouses. And he even actually looked at Smith Point, but realized he didn't need to go there. So next up is a lighthouse that's fairly local to us. You might not recognize the left-hand picture. This is Bloody Point Bar. You know where that is? South end of Kent Island. And it's really an important place to know about if you're a big ship coming up, because the channel that runs towards Baltimore is way over there on the coast of Kent Island, because that's where the remaining riverbed of the Susquehanna River is. And that's also where some of the deepest water on the bay is. It's one hole there that's something like close to 120 feet, I think. So Bloody Point was built to help people, kept ships stay in the deeper water as they made their way north. And this is in the days, of course, before they had the Bay Bridge to look at. So they did need some guides. Now, this was built in 1882. And about a year later, it established a noticeable tilt. If you've been over there, you may have noticed that lighthouse tilting. Yes, it is a few degrees, not as much as it was originally. So what's the deal? How come it tilts? I like to compare something to, if you ever go to the beach, stand still, keep your feet still, and let the surf wash past your feet. What happens? Yeah, the surf takes the sand out from your feet and your feet start to sink. That's what happened here. Just between the river current and the tidal currents, there was a scouring away of the bottom on one side more than the other, and it began to tilt a little bit. They did manage to improve it, again, get it back almost dead level. And as you can see, it also acquired a coat of red paint. And you can see the living quarters of the Coast Guard, which of course are no longer there. This is what it looks like today. That big hole is actually where one of the iron plates that make up the thing had corroded and broken loose and fallen down on the deck. You'll see, if you look on the right of the lighthouse on the deck, you can see the edge of the open door. This access door has been open for years. And you can sometimes find on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet videos of people climbing up and wandering around in there. Well, there's more to this story than that. Biggest question is, why did that iron fall apart like that? Well, while the Coast Guard was still on board manning that light, they had a storage of fuel in the lower level inside the caisson below the tower. And there was about 500 gallons of fuel, diesel, I believe. And one day, for reasons I think they never figured out, there was a fuel fire. So these poor 2 Coast Guard guys, they're trying like crazy to put out this 500 gallons of oil fire that's down below using the handheld fire extinguishers that they had available. Was not helpful. So finally, they realized we've done what we can, we have to bug out. So they abandoned the lighthouse and that fuel burned and it became essentially a blowtorch straight up the tower. And it destroyed everything inside. Once it was extinguished, they did reestablish a ladder because the light up at top in the beacon area was restored for use as a lighthouse. But a lot of these plates, these iron plates that made up the structure, were warped and buckled, and they tried to weld them closed as best they could. My best guess is that as best they could, just flat out wasn't good enough. The heat of that fire did too much damage. And over time, especially when there's nobody there anymore and it's exposed to the elements, it just corroded. Unfortunately, we can expect this to get worse and it'll never get better. This lighthouse is privately owned. It is owned by an attorney who now lives in the San Francisco area. And he has owned several lighthouses. The last I communicated with him was several years ago. He never answers my emails anymore. I sent him this picture to ask him if he had a plan. He never even answered the email. But he did have this wonderful plan for this lighthouse and also 14-foot bank lighthouse, which sits out in the middle of Delaware Bay. If you've ever gone into Delaware Bay, you may have seen it. Short story version, he wanted to bring in water from the bay, run it through solar-powered reverse osmosis purification. So collect barrels and barrels of ultra pure water. I mean, that's about as pure as you and I could make it, unless you make it all distilled water. And so what was he going to do with that pure bay water? He was going to take it ashore to a brewery and make beer or ale and market it as, some bay-related ale. That's never going to happen in Bloody Point. I don't know about 14-foot bank because he didn't answer my email a couple of months ago. This is the way Bloody Point looks today. Recently, a couple of years back, I guess, the Coast Guard decided it was too risky for their guys to scale the ladder inside to service the light. So they pulled the light out and they established this beacon. You can see it's on the pilings very close to the lighthouse, but this is what serves the purpose of guiding ships today. Now we're going to come up a little more to Sandy Point. How many of you have been by Sandy Point Light anytime last few years? Yeah, a few of us have. Okay, good. So this is also privately owned. It is owned by a real estate developer, and I talk to him every year. He takes my calls. So Sandy Point was also a case of a lighthouse first built on shore, but it was too far from the channel, and the ship owners complained, and so they eventually put the caisson out. And if you can see in this picture, the roof is in very bad condition, and so there was a lot of rainwater coming in. Here you get a little better look. This is while the scaffolding was up on the outside. And you can see at this lower corner here, right where the sun and the shadow come together, there's a real hole right there. So, and you can see there's a lot of vegetation on the deck. This is a lighthouse, that's a metal deck. What's that vegetation growing in? Thank you, seagulls. Enough said. Well, the good news is it looks like this now. You can see he's got a nice new roof, new windows, new doors, and they're now working on the inside to make it habitable. Now, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but I'll just say he found a lot of rotted wood, and he said, we've got a lot of termite damage to fix. Anybody know where termites actually live? In the dirt near your house, not in the bay. So I'm just assuming it's all just rot from wet wood, all the rain that came in over many years. So moving up just a little bit farther. Recognize that one? Baltimore Harbor Light off the Magothy. This lighthouse presented some real challenges. This is, by the way, the last lighthouse built on the bay. And it was built in 1904 all the way up to 1908. So why did it take that long? Well, what they did, they formed the caisson on land and sealed it. This is the way they delivered them out. They towed them out, and then they opened the bottom so that it would start to fill with water, and it would tip up and sink to the bottom of the bay. And then they had to stabilize it once it reached the bottom. Well, unfortunately for them, when they first put that caisson down, a big storm came and it tipped the caisson over. And the contractor actually went bankrupt. He couldn't, so they found somebody who could find a way to right it, sink it down again. And what they had to do, they had to send people through a hatch down to the bottom with buckets to muck out the mud and make it sink through the mud down to firm ground. They did have a problem with that. After spending a day working, mucking out the mud, and they came up at the end of the workday, they began to have problems with things like nosebleeds and ear bleeds and that kind of a thing. We call it the bends. You don't have to be in a submarine 100 feet down. So Baltimore Harbor is an important light, and there's a particular piece of history that you might or might not know. Now, in this picture, you see all of the windows and doors are boarded up, sealed. And there's this ship, W547, with a crane loading a big box of some kind. What was in that box was a 4,600-pound generator called a Snap 7B. What's in it? Strontium-90. Those of us old enough to know about fallout scares, strontium, what they had was a concept. This was a proof of concept. Could we take the heat generated by strontium-90 when it decays, convert it to electricity, and run the light? And the answer was yes. They were able to do it. This is the only lighthouse in the US where that was done. After almost a year, they said, okay, experiment has proved doable. Let's not leave all that strontium-90 out there in an unoccupied, unsupervised lighthouse. Who knows what would happen? So they took it out after almost a year. Today, that same technology powers lighthouses along the coast of Russia on the Arctic Ocean. And in probably smaller versions, it powers satellites. I'm told there's one on the moon. I'm guessing if we ever go to Mars, there might be one in Mars. I don't know, but part of it was an experiment to see how could we generate electricity without having to fuel something. And you're not going to do it with, windmills or anything like that. And they found that this was a viable technology and is still working today. So what's Baltimore Light look like today? Pretty good. Pretty good. That thing hanging out the side is the boarding ladder. And if you go by in a boat on a weekend, you may see the owners, or some of them, there's 4 couples that own it, up there. And if you're there at the exact right time, you'll see them using the davits to pull up supplies from the boat up to where they can use, food and whatever for the weekend. And at really the right time, you might even see them lifting their dog up in a harness, which I'm told pretty cool. Now, I recently talked to one of the owners, and they confirmed I hope you can't hear that. Just Shut up. I can hear it, but I hope you couldn't. It's now available. They've managed to find insurance, and it's now available. You can rent it for a B&B as a B&B. And there is a crabber who's a big force on YouTube, who actually was, I think, their first B&B guest. It's not cheap. Don't quote me exactly, but I believe the daily rate was in the range of 3,000. So you got to really want it. It might be less than that. I could be misinformed. If you're interested, they have a website. You can look into it there. And they're also doing tours and day visits. You don't have to spend the night. So if you really want to get aboard and see the work they've done to make this a livable place, I haven't been in. I've seen some photographs, but I can't get my hands on those photographs. It's a very comfortable looking place. They've done a great job. Everybody's favorite. I hope it's your favorite. It's my favorite. It's Thomas Point Shoal. Now, did you know, some of us know, this is not the first, not the second, but the third lighthouse marking the shoal at Thomas Point. Lighthouse number 1 was on Thomas Point. This is the Chesapeake Bay. Erosion happens. It was threatened by erosion. So they actually had to take it down and move it back and build lighthouse number 2 on the point. And that was still standing for quite a while. But the ship owners, ship captains complained bitterly because the light, reflectors with candles, lots of candles, lots of reflectors, not very bright. It's 1.5 miles from water that's about, well, actually more than a mile, about 1.75 miles or so before the water gets 20 feet deep. The bell was that far away, and they said in bad weather you couldn't even hear the bell. So finally, that it was decided to build a screw pile light, the one that we all know and love. The second tower was also threatened by erosion and collapsed. The land on which those 2 towers were built is underwater. You couldn't find it if you tried, because the remaining land is, actually, if you went out to the marker into Fishing Creek, you would be close to the tip of that water, tip of that land. At any rate, this is the only screw pile lighthouse in the country that's still in place where it was originally built and in service as an active aid to navigation. Now, some people will tell you it's the only one still in place where it was built, and that's not quite right. There is one other that's still in place where it was built. It's in the middle of Mobile Bay, and it was trying very hard to collapse under its own weight and fall into the water. But the Alabama Historic Society got a hold of it and managed to correct that. The first picture I saw of that one, there was actually a plank in place of one of the angled support beams. It is now secure. The wood has been replaced where it needed to be replaced. They put a beacon on top, and it is listed as a private aid to navigation. I only know that for sure because I talked to the historic community in Alabama this past summer just to confirm it. So this is a National Historic Landmark. And how did it avoid all of this problem with ice that so many of these other lighthouses had? Well, first of all, like some of the pictures you saw, it had standoff pilings, one north and one south, in addition to the foundation pilings that are all around it. and they were intended to divert ice flows. It was first opened 150 years ago in 1875. And in 1877, ice on the bay got to be thick. And the bay is several miles wide at that point, about 5 or 6 miles wide. So as the weather warmed and the ice began to break up, you've got huge sheets of thick ice moving south, and they would hit the piling and start to make the lighthouse shake. Now, I am confident that this incident happened in daylight because the lighthouse shook so much that the lamp up top fell over and broke and spilled its oil fuel all over the top. Since there was no fire, I think we can safely assume it was not a nighttime event, because if the light had been lit, we would not have a lighthouse today. To combat that, not visible in this picture, there is an iron wedge just about 90 feet north of the lighthouse. It's designed to split the ice flows. It helped, but not quite enough. And so in the 1880s, they put all of this riprap on the north and south end of the lighthouse. And that is what kept this lighthouse standing for these 150 years. And by the way, if you're in a boat and you want to go between the riprap and the wedge, I recommend you not do that because it's supported by 3 smaller screw piles, but they're not vertical. They're like a teepee. They go out like this. And you don't want to find it the hard way, right? Now, this is the privy on the lighthouse, and it has a strap around it. I think you can see that strap. Why? Well, the beam that supports it cracked, and it was rotting and breaking, and the privy was tilting like this and about trying to fall into the bay. So some very bright person, I don't know if it's John or Howard or Kathy, but somebody was out there and they said, we got to do something. They called the contractor that we had been working with, who came rushing down from Baltimore and put a strap to support the privy until repairs could be made. So with a new beam in place later, which was a hard beam to find because it's old wood and very long, it is surviving. This is the beam while it was still there. Some piece of this is now on the lower level. When you take one of our tours and go aboard with permission, you'll see this broken wood. It's pretty badly rotted. Wonderful thing happened in 2020. Anybody know whose boat that is? Jimmy Buffett's boat. Yes. Jimmy Buffett came to visit us. And John, can I tell your story? Yeah. Okay. Now, John, remind me, was this a Thursday night or a Friday night? Friday night, that's what I thought. Okay. So John and Pat, his wife, are at home in the living room, I don't know, watching TV or whatever you were doing. And the phone rings, John's phone rings, and he picks it up and answers. It's the Visitors Bureau. This is not a verbatim conversation, but they said, John, very important, we've got a VIP who wants to come and visit your lighthouse. Can you take him out there tomorrow, please? I can't do that. I've got to take my daughter to the dentist. She's having her wisdom teeth pulled. John, you don't understand. This is a very important VIP. We told him you'd take him out to the lighthouse tomorrow. I can't do that. I got to go to the dentist with my daughter. John, it's Jimmy Buffett. Now, I know Pat must have been listening because the next thing was, John, go. So John said yes. And he and Dave Gendell went out in John's personal boat and opened up the lighthouse for Jimmy Buffett. And he has 2 boats out there, a sailboat and a powerboat. And you know, this is the powerboat, obviously. He was on an extended trip from at least Long Island Sound down the East Coast on his way to Florida. And he was just visiting lighthouses. He was, unbeknownst to many of us at the time, he's quite a lighthouse buff. So he came out and toured the lighthouse. He got a really good personal tour. And there he is, sitting on one of our antique chairs in the parlor room, playing his guitar and singing. He actually performed 2 songs in the lighthouse, one in that room and one up top where the beacon light is. And his crew was there and they recorded it. And his hope was to put these 2 recordings of songs made in the lighthouse into an album, part of his collection of work. But he did not own the rights to either one of those songs. And so he could not do it unless he could negotiate the rights. But today, if you want to, if you go on the internet, I know you can find it on, I guess, YouTube or one of them anyway, and just search for Jimmy Buffett, Coast of Marseille, the French city. An older recording of him singing that song is on an album that he put out years ago, so you can at least hear what he sang. So he was there for several hours singing a couple of songs, and one of his conversations was, John, you know, this is a wonderful lighthouse. You guys have done great work. John said, well, you know, we've got this big event coming up in August of 25. It's 150th anniversary. We'd love to have you come be there. Unfortunately, couldn't make it. He did pass away. But his picture is in the lighthouse. We're very proud of that relationship, even though it didn't end up quite as the way we hoped it might. Now, there's something really special out on the lighthouse these days. If you've been by in a boat, you might have seen what some people think is a dog. It's actually not a dog. And there's actually now more than one, but let's start with this one. This one is the first one. This is coyote decoy. You can buy them at Amazon. My wife gave me one for my last birthday in September. Why do that? Look at the wood he's standing on. This is not winter. Those are not icicles dripping off. The problem was every winter, our sun-powered bird call that fishermen who are out there fishing hate to hear all the time is designed to keep the seagulls away. And well, it was helpful, but come springtime, when it comes time to get the light ready for tours and more preservation work, it was about this thick on the landing pier. So it was suggested, there's a fishing captain called Drew, I forget Drew's last name, and his big, the big worm, you know, a fishing boat is a large green hulled boat, commercial fishing boat, head boat. And so in honor of Drew, the coyote is named Drew. Now, you're about to see what good work Drew does, but first, you might remember that the platform he's on in this picture was taken off by a winter storm called Debbie. And the platform left of a piece with his feet still bolted to it. And it floated up the bay. And I'm not sure if it was the Coast Guard or the Natural Resources Police. I think it might have been the Natural Resources Police. But anyway, because David Seitz is well known for taking all these pictures most of us have seen, they called David and said, David, you're a coyote. And so David got his point. He went up there and got a line on the structure and got permission from the crew that has the work barges working on the Bay Bridge on maintenance projects, so he could secure the platform with Drew on it short term until he could arrange to tow it ashore and salvage it and salvage Drew. And then for the next, quite a while, He took Drew on many adventures around, and there's a book about that, which is it's a kid's book, but it is a great story. A lot of great stories. So what we have now, Drew, and behind him is Debbie. And if you look really closely at Debbie's paws, she's got red, nail polish. And my gosh, they've got a pup. Now today, if you went out, you would find Drew is still on duty. Debbie, I'm told, is up on the second deck. Drew's on the second deck. Debbie's on the first deck. Okay, Drew's up on the second deck because our audio bird scaring device is not a perfect bird scaring device, but look at what they're standing on. That's almost a season of no guano. So it works. It works. The pup is somewhere.
The pup is sure right now. I'm taking two. And their name.
I know there's a naming contest. You can help name the pup. At first, I thought the pup had gone to school, but no, he's performing. He's visiting. So every lighthouse has stories, many stories. We've only had time for a few. The Chesapeake chapter of the Lighthouse Society exists to preserve lighthouses, to educate the public about lighthouses, to provide visits to lighthouses. If you are at all interested in lighthouses, I encourage you to look us up at www.cheslights.org. Now, you don't have to remember that because you can always Google Chesapeake Chapter U.S. Lighthouse Society. We have lots of history of lighthouses, and the website keeps getting bigger and bigger. Lots of photos of lighthouses, stories about all of the lighthouses on the Chesapeake, including those that are no longer here. So we very much enjoy our role as a chapter in sharing our enthusiasm for lighthouses with you. And I hope some of you might find you might want to join with us too, at least explore the possibilities. So thank you for your attention. And if you have more questions, have at 'em. Yes.
Lighthouse in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. Sharp's Island has an interesting history. When there was in fact an island, Sharp's Island, there was a navigation beacon placed kind of on a shed on the southern side of the island, and it was built on skids because the island was already eroding. So over time, they moved it back and they moved it back and they moved it back until they couldn't move it back anymore because there wasn't any more moving back to do. And so they built this caisson out there, which is actually the same design as Bloody Point Bar. And so the island disappeared, but the caisson remained. And then again, like all the other lighthouses around, eventually the resident crew was removed. How did it tip? Well, again, we had the scouring problem that we talked about with Bloody Point, but in, I believe it was the 90s, somebody hit it and it tipped, and they couldn't rewrite it enough. And so it's now charted as, last time I looked at a chart, which has been a while, abandoned lighthouse. And there it sits. And it doesn't seem to be tilting anymore. Doesn't seem to be tilting any less. Just sitting there. And it didn't have a fire in it that I know of, so it might be there for a whole long time. Answer your question? Thank you. Any others? Yes.
The casements that were built 120 years ago, you said they were built on land. How did they estimate how big to make them?
Good question. Well, the diameter of the tube would be based on a couple of things. One is how how long is the tube going to be? Because they knew how deep the water was, and they did testing of the bottom to know how deep in the bottom they would have to go. And then what is the structure that's going to be put on this caisson? So they built them as hollow tubes and then towed them out and sunk them in place. One thing I didn't mention is once they reached fairly firm bottom, not just soft Chesapeake ooze, so it got down to where the bottom was somewhat stable, and then they filled it with a lot of concrete, rocks, rubble to establish a very heavy base. So, for example, in Baltimore Light, I have seen some diagrams. There's probably 30 or 40 feet of weight still below the water line, but down into the mud line to make it more stable. I think they learned some lessons from the lighter weight ones, so they made them as sturdy as they possibly could. I can't testify to the assembly of the tube itself. Clearly, it's made of metal, iron for the most part. Then they would bring the building materials out to build the structure on top. Wood, brick, and they would just have a work crew out there, and they'd had to bring out all the materials necessary to build it and to establish the living quarters and the light, fuel for the light, the whole bit was all brought out. Yes. You mean the tube itself? All I know about it is it's welded plates of curved metal, iron. Yeah. Oh, spell. I thought you said build, sorry. C-I-C-A-I-S-O-N. S-O-N. Yeah. Well, when they bring it out, the ends are sealed, so it's actually floating. It's full of air. And then there's a way to open the bottom and start water coming in, and then open what might be equivalent of a valve at the top so the air could escape, and it would tilt up full of water and sink. Because the ends were sealed until they unsealed them. It would go partway down into it, but they needed to actually excavate it by hand labor. The more muck they excavated, the deeper it would sink. And if you can imagine, you're down there with a crew of people, and you're digging mud out. There's not much light, whatever kind of, maybe a miner's headlight or something, because there's not electric lights available. And you're digging it out, and the tube is sinking around you. And as you're digging it, they're hauling out the buckets of dirt and, I don't know, dumping them in the bay. I don't know what they did with them. Yes.
About the it seems to be
It's experienced every major hurricane that's come up the bay so far. We are concerned about future hurricanes because we know the water is rising. And so there's a contract already let for an engineering firm to study how in the heck are we going to raise this thing up? How many feet? 6 feet? Eventually 6 feet above where it is now. Now I can tell you, I started my volunteer work there in 2005. So probably by 2006 or so, I was out there doing preservation work, and we would go to the platform down beneath the lighthouse that's in shade for our lunch break. And I was standing there on that platform, and an old freighter was coming up the bay. And it wasn't one of these ships that had that bulbous bow, which reduces the size of the wake. It was one of these freighters that produces a huge wake. And it's over there against Kent Island, and I watched the wake coming in. Now, the platform I was standing on was probably 4 to 5 feet above the level of the bay. And as this thing came and hit the platform, which is, the floor of it is just board side by each, so there's a little crack in between. And here comes the wake, and the shallower the water gets, the taller the wake gets. I don't know if you knew that or not. That's why waves break on the seashore. And all of a sudden, my feet are getting wet. I mean, it came right up through the boards and soaked my shoes. And that was just from a freighter wake. So you can imagine when we get one of these, we don't want to get one of these major hurricanes, but the threat is always there. I think I saw another hand in the back. Yes.
Navigation. How does things you go?
Some yes, not all. For example, Baltimore Light had its light removed. Or no, not Baltimore Light. Sandy Point Light had the light removed from it a few years back. Again, because the Coast Guard said the interior is deteriorated to the point we don't want our people trying to get up there and service it. To my knowledge, they did not place a beacon out in the water the way they did on Bloody Point. But for those that have a beacon in them, the private owners do not own the light. The Coast Guard owns the light, and they have the ability, the legal ability to come out at any time and service the light as may be required. And sometimes they'll get reports from people either in boats or on land, and they can see the light is malfunctioning. I can remember one night, God, it's got to be over 15 years ago. I was looking out, we have a 3-mile view to Thomas Point Shoal Light. It's a tiny little thing 3 miles away. Well, we used to be able to look at it every night before we went to bed, and we could watch the light flash every 5 seconds. And our view was a little bit different than most because there are some red panes in the top that create 2 red sectors. Now, those of you who are boaters know what a red sector means. It's a white light. If you're seeing red, you're in the wrong place. So fix it. And we are right on the dividing line of a red sector and a white sector. We saw a light that was both red and white at the same time. So that was kind of fun. Now, we don't see it anymore because that light used to be visible was charted for at least 11-mile visibility. The chart may still say that, but it's not. It's 2 miles at best because the Coast Guard found that their solar panels were not providing enough electricity, particularly in the wintertime, to charge the batteries. And the batteries weren't big enough. The batteries were like knee-high tall batteries, but still weren't big enough to operate the light, the weather station, and the fog signal. And so they made some changes. One of the changes they made was disable the fog signal. If you think you hear the lighthouse fog signal on a foggy day or night, you don't. You hear the ship's fog signals out there at anchor or traversing the bay. Another thing they did was they put smaller batteries out and smaller wattage lights. So the batteries that are operating now are 2 store batteries, kind of like you would find in a larger size pickup truck. Bigger than some cars, but not really big batteries. The weather station has been upgraded, and we hear that they plan to modernize it even further, which probably means even less battery draw. But right now, it seems to be offline. And what with the shutdown, I have no idea if or when any repair or adjustment is going to be made. I do know I had people say, Bob, what happened to the light? We used to be able to see it from the Bay Bridge. And now I used to home in on it when we're coming home to the South River. Can't see it now. That's the story. Yes.
Well, not on your topic kind of, but my question is, if somebody owns the lighthouse, do they pay taxes?
I don't know. That's for Thomas Point Shoal. Yeah. The way of the land under the lighthouse, all of these lighthouses, there's a defined plot probably circular, that is still federal property. The structure can be purchased if the government offers it for sale. If it is an active aid to navigation, the Coast Guard will come to service the light when they need to. And so they have to have, key to the door. And I don't know if there are real estate taxes on privately owned lighthouses. Not being a privately owned lighthouse owner and not intending to be, I already know how much work it takes to deal with a lighthouse. Yes. I wouldn't say all. I don't have the number. I know there are something over 30, maybe 35 lighthouses still standing and functioning on the bay, and some have been transferred, sold off. I don't know what triggers the General Services Administration to offer a couple. They don't offer them all at once, apparently. So every year or so, there'll be some listed as available. I think it's probably across the country. I'm most familiar with Chesapeake lighthouses. I have visited many lighthouses in various parts of the country, but just as a tourist. And so I don't have a lot of conversation with the people who allow you to visit a lighthouse as to what the ownership of those structures is.
Speak. Coast Guard is very because in their view, it's just another cost center that they have to pour money into. It's a lot of money to maintain lights, a lot more than you can imagine. And the Coast Guard does not want to be in a position to continue to do that. That's one reason why they've automated those things. There are no longer manned lights.
Not any at all. The last manned lighthouse was Boston Light on an island outside Boston Harbor. And by law, it had a resident lighthouse keeper. Sally's last name is spelled like snowman. I don't know if she pronounced it snowman, but Sally Snowman was the last keeper out there. She's no longer there either. She's retired. The only reason they said a keeper out there is because that was the site of the very first lighthouse built in the United States, even before we were the United States. And so it's kind of a sentimental thing to have a keeper out there. I guess somebody convinced the law people to make such a law. She is now retired. Best of my knowledge, there's no longer a resident keeper there.